Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Unlocking the Secrets of LED Cultivation Grower to Grower. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Samakis, and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Cannabis Business Times. In today's webinar, you will hear from two experienced cultivators who have used LED technology in their grows and who will share their honest accounts of their challenges, mistakes made, and lessons learned. LEDs can transform a cannabis cultivation facility, but there are adjustments that must be made to the environment to be successful with this powerful technology. In a few minutes, you'll hear more about tailored environmental recommendations and learn specific adjustments that you can make to optimize growth under LEDs, a tried and true process for introducing new strains and adjusting lighting parameters for optimal growth, and the nuances of selecting LEDs and understanding key considerations. With that, I'm thrilled to welcome today's speakers. Moderating the conversation today is Patrick Camphouse, Director of Business Development for BIOS Lighting. He is BIOS Lighting, which is sponsoring today's webinar. Patrick has 15 years of experience in commercial horticulture operations. He offers insights from his time with an 80-acre ornamental greenhouse, supplying big box garden centers and a cultivation of commercial cannabis within the Illinois Medical Cannabis Program. Patrick has supported commercial growers for the past 4 years by developing strategies that augment crop quality, yields, and business performance. Also joining us on today's webinar is Cody Neidig, Head of Cultivation for Pure Ohio Wellness, a vertically integrated medical cannabis company. Cody started as a trimmer and has successfully navigated the growing pains and challenges of an upstart cannabis cultivation company. He designed 2-tier cultivation rooms for nearly 15,000 square feet of plant canopy under BIOS LEDs. I'm also pleased to welcome Nelson Lindsley, founder of Poetry of Plants, an innovator and cultivator in the cannabis and hemp space who has worked with a multitude of grow and room technologies. He has also helped guide dozens of businesses and cultivation facilities into financial success. Nelson served as Senior Director of Cultivation with Maitre Genetics, starting up a 50,000 square foot multi-level cultivation facility while hiring and training more than 60 employees to manage operations. Before we dive into today's conversation, I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping notes. Everyone on this call has been muted and the video is turned off except for our presenters. But there will be time at the end of the webinar for questions. At any time during the presentation, when you think of it, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. If you click on that, that will open the Q&A box. So please feel free to type in your questions at any time, and we'll get to as many questions we can at the end of the event. Patrick will be moderating our Q&A as well. Also, we are recording today's webinar. And we'll be sending a copy of the recording to all registrants via email in a few days. With that, I'm pleased to pass the mic to Patrick Camphouse from BIOS Lighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to be here today. I have the privilege of working with great growers like Cody and Nelson every day. BIOS was launched back in 2014. Our founders had some strong roots with NASA, developing both circadian lighting for astronauts and LED horticulture lighting to grow plants for sustainable and nutritious food in space. Today, we prioritize reliability and durability in the materials, build, and design of our LED fixtures, and we take pride in the reliability and commitment of our customer support and services to you and your facility. With that, I'm just going to turn it over to Cody and hear about your experience with LEDs, going from HPS and everything you've done in your facility.
Awesome. Thank you. So first of all, I just want to thank both Cannabis Business Times and BIOS for putting on this webinar. Really appreciate the opportunity to come out and kind of tell you guys a little bit about the Pure Ohio story. And then with that being said as well, I have to make sure that I thank our entire team at Pure Ohio, because it takes a bunch of people to make this a successful business. And no matter what I'm talking about today, without the people that are working in it, we could never have been successful. So with that being said, I'll just jump right into it. Just a little bit of background on myself as well as the company. Like Michelle said, I've been with the company for 4.5 years, and I started out as a trimmer. And just after about 2 years, I held a variety of positions, compliance officer, to be one of them. And then about 2 years in, I became the head of cultivation, just learning on the job, basically. Pure Ohio Wellness is a medical cannabis cultivation processor dispensaries located in Springfield, Ohio. And we have 25,000 square feet of cultivation space for our vegetative and flowering canopy. We're an Ohio owned and operated business. We're owned by a semi-retired professional motorcycle racer named Larry Pegram. And yeah, so we started out with the old school technology, high pressure sodiums and ceramic metal halides, single tiered greenhouse tables that rolled back and forth, as you can see in that picture in the top left. Just very basic old style cultivation practices. And then recently, in the past year, actually, we transitioned into vertically tiered racking systems with the BIOS LEDs, which we could not be more happy with. As you can see there, that's actually the very first day that we were installing, and BIOS, all like basically their entire team, came out to help us with the first installation day. It was pretty impressive. So prior to that room just had plants sitting on the floor being hand watered every single day, with PVC trellising over them. So obviously it's a huge change from that to what we're looking at in these pictures right here. And I can't speak highly enough about BIOS's relationship that they've built with us. Basically anything that we've asked them for, they've been happy to provide. So we were starting to look at LEDs and comparing positives and negatives and everything like that whenever somebody that another cultivator recommended BIOS, and for vertically tiered application because of the way that their system's mounted. It's extremely quick and easy to install. And just to go even further with that, we were looking for something that was 800 watts or more in power supply, because we can always dim the lights down as needed for certain strains or what have you. And at the time, BIOS didn't even make a 800 watt LED. The highest that it went up to was 715 watts. So they custom built a system for us just because we requested it, which I think is a pretty amazing thing that they offered to us. So going down the line, we ordered 100 I's and 672 Li2s, all to increase our canopy square footage from 5,500 square feet prior to, with this new system, going all the way up to about 1,400 or 14,600 square feet of canopy space between our bedroom that we did, as well as 4 flower rooms. So just in the process of going through that ordering process and everything, BIOS worked with us every single step of the way, even down to whenever we were planning on having our lights delivered. They accommodated us. We didn't have enough storage space to take the entire delivery at one time, so they planned that around with us so that we weren't burdening ourselves with too many things to store at the time. So they actually allowed us to split that delivery into 3 separate shipments and planned it basically perfect to the day of whenever we needed more lights. That's the day that they all came in, and they would constantly be checking with us to make sure that all of our equipment was working properly right as it was coming in. So moving right along, these are our flower rooms. Obviously a very early flowering stage on the left-hand side, and then an extremely late flowering stage on the right-hand side. The performance that we've gotten out of these lights is just actually incredible. Every single one of our strains basically more or less has increased by about 3 to 4% THC on average. our animal mints previously, its highest was about 35% THC. And once we got it under the LEDs, we've had 37% results coming back. Just our gelato is normally about 24% THC. And every single time under the LEDs, it comes back at about 29%. Our grams per square foot has significantly increased. We're currently running about 75 grams per square foot on good runs with some of our best yielding strains, even producing up to 85, 90 grams per square foot occasionally. The electricity usage of these lights compared to our old HPS and CMH lights is obviously we have so many more that the bill itself has gone up, but because of the fact that we have multiple tiers of it and so much more canopy square footage. But in a 1-to-1 comparison, the 800-watt LEDs producing a significant amount more lighting than our HPSs. Our electricity usage per light is about 25% less. It's from 12.5 kilowatt hours per day to about 9.5. The PPFD that we get off of them is roughly at our highest concentration areas, about 1900, whereas the HPS rooms that we still have active are only getting up to about 800 PPFD. So just a huge significant difference in everything that it's changed in our growing practices and everything like that. That's not to say that there's not some learning curves that go along with this vertically tiered system. I would say that outside of lighting, probably the next most important thing would be your HVAC and your air movement, which there's some, we don't even have it down perfect yet, if I'm being entirely honest, but we have it pretty good. And there's nothing more important whenever you're thinking about going to this vertically tiered style of growing than to figure out all of your equipment and how it's going to work together. So providing the correct set points that you're going to want to run to your contractors, to your vendors, everything like that is just so extremely important. You need to have an exact idea of every single detail that could come into play with it. You need to provide your HVAC specialists with the amount of water that you're going to be putting in the room, the amount of heat that the LEDs are going to be generating, what your desired set points are, whether you're going to run slightly higher temperatures to accommodate for that higher lighting that you get from the LEDs, which I would highly recommend. Just to go even farther on how amazing BIOS is, I think it really, what sets them apart is the customer service aspect of everything. Other companies have just huge return processes that make it so that you have a greater downtime on your equipment. Whenever I have a light that goes out or a power supply that goes bad, all I do, which is pretty rare to be entirely honest, all I have to do is I just email Patrick or Jennifer or just anybody at the BIOS team. I say, hey, I have a power supply that I need replaced. They say, all right, got it. And they immediately send us a power supply the second that we need it and send us a return label to ship it back to them. No questions asked, anything like that. It's the easiest process that I've ever had, and they're extremely easy to work with. We just, anything that we need, they're always willing to help. So along with the vertical tiered growing racks, there's the obvious question of how you get up to the second tier and how you deal with that labor aspect. One of the easiest things about the system that we chose is that there's a scaffolding system that Pip has implemented and designed, and it makes longer labor tasks like foliating and pruning and stuff like that much easier to do on that second tier. And then if you have smaller tasks, like we use beneficial insects for a lot of our pest control, placing those out requires just a lot of moving through the rows and scouting and things like that. We use rolling ladders to make sure that we just get an easy way that we can quickly get in and out of aisles and move through the room efficiently. On top of that as well, training your employees is a number one priority whenever you move to something like that. Actually having people know how to use the scaffolding system and the equipment safely that you're asking them to use is a hugely important thing. They have to be comfortable in using it so that they can continue to do the awesome work that all of our cultivators do. So, I mean, that's about all I have to talk about with the BIOS team and how amazing they are at, accommodating us on every single thing that we ask them to do.
Cody, how about your any adjustments to your veg time?
Oh yeah, so our veg time is actually, I mean, it's been cut in half. We used to run a 4-week veg time under the HPSs and CMHs, and now we run, I mean, some of our strains need to be run only 1 week so that they can go into flower. And then the longest veg time that we have is 3 weeks now on some of our shorter, more squat strains to get them to fill out nicely. But I mean, just the decrease in inputs that causes just makes it a much easier, more profitable SOP basically.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to hear all that. So I guess next up is going to be Nelson, and we're going to hear about his experience. He was an early adopter of the LEDs and has a lot of experience. So Nelson, take it away.
Hey, Matt, how you doing? Thank you. Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Michelle. So since kind of about 3 or 4 years in cultivating full time, I started playing around with different technologies, different lighting. I've been around the LED space for a while, and I've had a loud voice about some things. That picture right there is Gary Payton after we took the trellis down. So you can see that's a pretty big yield. I think that ended up being 2.8 pounds per 4x4 of flower, and I'd say 2.2 were A's and B pluses. So if you want to know what that, I can kind of look at a canopy now and kind of get a good sense, but my yields definitely went up compared to high pressure sodium and LEDs. And, haven't really looked back since 2016 is when I switched over to LEDs. And that would be my own grows and client grows. And then I've helped a lot of farms make that transition from high pressure sodium to LEDs. And so far it's been pretty successful. Do you want to switch pics, Pat? I lost you, by the way. All right, cool. So this is a high pressure sodium room. That space actually became Node Labs, a little history, pretty cool. That was a barn. And then to the right, you can see, I've been playing around multi-level since 2016 as well. This was a project I was a part of up here in Sonoma County on the right, where we had a multi-level veg. Here is we're skipping around. But, and currently right now I work with Humboldt Highline, where we also deploy a multi-level LED indoor nursery veg, which has been beneficial. This is actually a picture of, I was about a year into running LEDs and just getting over the learning curve with a company called Greenstone that gave me a space to kind of play around and figure all that out. And they are still friends of mine, and some of those guys are still in the industry, which is cool. So just a little bit of an overview of the background, and then thank you to BIOS as well for having me on here. I'm working with BIOS. I have a licensed grow that we're finishing building right now, and that's going to be all BIOS, which I'm really excited about. I've been working on and off with BIOS now for 5 or 6 years. I've had a few other lights that I've run, and for me, BIOS was also a great choice. Number one, because of the people and the customer service, and then the focus on technology. So both of those things have been really important. The engineering team and the science team behind BIOS, there's an alignment as far as a view on lighting that I'm hip to. And I've done a lot of work with changing the light color temperature, so spectrum analysis as well, and figuring out what strains perform at what light levels. So that's been one of the things that you hear a lot, that some strains or some cultivars don't perform well under LED, and they perform better under high pressure sodium. And I think that's more of a component of grow style, application, and then light intensity. One of the things that we've been able to accomplish with LEDs is dramatically increase the amount of photons that are hitting the plant. But overall, you know, most of the genetics that we've been growing that have been commercially popular, they were not bred for those high light levels. They're bred outside, or they're bred in low light environments. So we have an evolution of that. So there's still a little bit of a learning curve with figuring out what performs well with the correct amount of light under LEDs. Here we have a multi-tier flower that I designed, helped build and start up. That was my tree in that great company in Pennsylvania that I was able to get going. And this is when we were figuring out, this is when the inner canopy airflow systems were just coming to the market. And we worked with both duct sock and fabric air and an engineering company to figure out a lower cost solution than some of the metal fabricated systems that were out there that were very expensive. And that was successful, but it took about 6 months of testing in the field to figure that out. And now we're seeing more of these inner canopy duct sock designs that are out there that are satisfactory or sufficient enough for moving the airflow. And then Pat, go to the last pictures too, just to show. I dug up some old pictures from the vault that are kind of cool. So that to the right, this was in 2008, I believe. On the left, that's just an organic high pressure sodium warehouse grow. And on the right, that's the first vertical grow that I ever worked on. So I've been playing around with vertical growing for a while. That system is ridiculous. It was not functional and did not really catch on, although there was a small trend. They called that the octagon. There was a small trend of people doing 3 levels, but in the space that I have enough power, but not enough space to put all those lights. And I was, you know, I got sold on that being better for yield. It was a disaster. I ran that system twice and then took it apart and then switched it over to the picture on the left. But I've always kind of been tinkering and always kind of playing around with different systems. This was definitely early on in my grow career where you know, the school hard knocks. The hardest thing about that system, of course, was cleaning it. And I think that ended up being 18 feet tall, but it was ridiculous. But I had fun putting it together and building it, and it worked well enough with what I thought, how I thought it would work. But overall, been doing this for a long time and tinkering and playing around for a long time, and I'm fully committed to growing with LEDs. You won't see me going back to high pressure sodiums anytime soon. And we can talk a little bit more about why that is, and also why we're seeing some trends of people moving back to high pressure sodium for a specific look or quality of the flower. And I believe that part of the issue is that we have high powered LEDs right now, and every strain performs well under high powered LEDs at 100%. But there's a human condition where people think more light, more power means more flower at a higher quality. And my belief, and that's been kind of backed up by a few scientists like Bruce Bugbee, is that growing any crop is a zero-sum game, where you've got a pizza pie, essentially, if we use that metaphor. And if you're pushing the plant for higher yield, if you're giving it more energy in one area, it's going to move resources and effectively use that energy to push where it's most efficient, which is if you're giving it a lot of light and a lot of food, you're going to grow a lot more flower, a lot more biomass. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be something that consumers desire, that it's going to have that bag appeal or that smokability that's really important in this market now. So I believe that there's a balance point between yield and quality. And what that sometimes means is that we're never really going to hit 100% all the time, at least. with LED lights, because the amount of light, we're able to give the plants like 50 to 60 moles per day with high powered LEDs. Some varieties might perform well. A lot of varieties end up looking more like an outdoor plant, which is not desirable when you're growing indoor flower. So backing that off and meeting the plant where it's at and playing around with the light level, but not necessarily needing to push it. Like some of the guys that are growing the best flower in the California market right now, they're not even going, they've got 650 watt LEDs, which is kind of traditional, and they're not moving past 70% light intensity at any point in the flower to be able to get that quality. Do their yields suffer a little bit? Yes, but they're aiming for that higher level, higher teal flower. And so they've learned and made those adjustments, and the quality of the flower reflects in it, and they're growing under LEDs. And I would argue that it's that's some of the best flower in the market. And this whole idea about, we need to go back to HBS, I just think there's a degree of reluctance, or maybe there's a learning curve, or it's what people know, and they can't take the chance of having a failed crop, which I also understand. So if you're in that kind of situation, that would make sense. But at some point, you're going to need to make that switch over, because the value that LEDs bring as far as efficiency and being able to push that threshold of yield and quality, you're not going to be able to have that control with high pressure sodium. And I do recommend checking out BIOS lighting, because they put a lot of effort, a lot of work in this. They've been in this LED game with horticulture for as long as anybody else, and the science behind it is solid. And they are all great people, which is a rarity these days. You'd be surprised, but there's a lot of people hustling lights and garden products that don't care about the consumer or don't care about their customers. So BIOS is not one of them. So that's a little bit on why I think we're seeing kind of the high pressure sodium. Like there's like a little bit of a push up in high pressure sodium. The other thing people would factor in maybe the cost, but we're now seeing LEDs getting pretty cost competitive. This right here is a cut of 7 stars from Compound. This is probably my favorite plant to grow on a multi-tier, because it produced quality and yield and was a shorter squatter variety. So it just it performed really well. So when we're working with those multi-tier deployments, strain selection is really important, because you do have limiting factors, which would be your shelf height. And that's something to really think about when you're planning your garden out and you're planning what the market will want. We're fortunate right now because the market's still been dominated by gelato type varieties, which tend to not stretch. But we might see a shift into things that are more haze dominant, which can provide some challenges for those multi-tier racking, and a different strategy when you're planting. You may need to adjust your plant count, all of that. And the other thing I would recommend, if people are just starting out with LEDs or they're struggling with LEDs, dim the lights down, make sure you're, ease up on your VPD. So run a lower VPD. Recently, I was able to acquire a very old and original cut of SFVOG, which I had yet to grow under LEDs. And very quickly I realized that it was very photosensitive, and I had to make some serious adjustments to the light intensity, just pushing it to like 800 ppfd for one day, which is what I'll typically do during the transition from veg to flowers. I'll push the light a little bit higher to push more growth. But with that cultivar, which is older and grown or bred in lower light situations, it just did not like that much artificial light. And I don't think I got past 650 ppfd for the entire cycle, which is pretty equivalent to the light level that you would get with a high pressure sodium light, even a single-ended or a double-ended hung up. So one of the thought processes when you're going into it is that you don't need to push everything until you get a sense of what the cultivar can perform. And with the crop steering technology that's out there now, where people are taking practices from tomato growers that are really pushing for volume of tomatoes, not necessarily quality tomatoes, but volume of tomatoes, I see a lot of people applying these practices without really knowing what they're going to create out of it. And they might grow a lot of flower, but then they have a lot of trouble selling that flower. And right now, the most important thing is being able to grow a crop that you can sell. And that might be, a 30, tailoring things so you have like a 30% reduction in yield. It might be going from, pushing the plant to get 3 pounds of light or 3 pounds in a 4x4 down to 2 pounds about 4x4, but your quality doubles, the look doubles, the experience people have when they consume the flower doubles. And that's going to be driven by more than just THC. You can push THC and you can push yield, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the flower is going to have a high level or a high degree of smokability. And that is what we need right now in the market to be competitive. And you can 100% achieve that with LEDs. So don't believe the hype or the propaganda around it. Just make some adjustments to your practices and how you use your lights and how you adjust the environment along with that. So that's my general synopsis, Pat, if you have any questions. Here's another great strain, very close to the light, by the way. That's a GMO grape pie, and that's a strain that performed very well. I probably could have given that 2000 ppfd, and it could have kept handling it. So some varieties like GMO handle a lot of light, and you can speed up the maturation time with light as well. I've not seen it more than like 7 days or so, but you can push that plant to finish a little bit quicker for better or worse. Oh, here we go. So that is the original cup winning cut of Super Silver Haze. So this is an older variety. It did not like the higher levels of light. You can see there's some micronutrient issues there that were present when we ramped it up. So I think we finished that plant at a max of 70% intensity to get the best possible output. And the yield did suffer a little bit compared to other varieties, but overall the quality of the flower and the quality of the smoke was very high.
Cool.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Pat.
No problem. Yeah, we've got some good questions here showing up in the chat. So we'll just kind of open this up to just a bit of a conversation. First one being, this hits on something that I think Cody can speak to, asking about with the change to LEDs, you have more control over lights, intensity, timing. How do you know how to pick the best parameters for these things as the plants are flowering? So I guess before you even go into that, I just want to point out when you're switching from HPS to LED, you oftentimes have to choose a control system because a lot of HPS systems don't have dimmability. So how did you guys go about addressing that?
So we actually went with GrowFlux, which is a pretty awesome controlling system. I mean, they have presets for you as far as like, if you don't know what you want to run, they kind of have some of those crop steering things that Nelson was touching on already kind of pre-programmed in for you if you don't know a whole lot about it. They provide you with like how much electricity usage you're doing, lots of cool features on GrowFlux. And then past that, just with all the extra control that you get with the LEDs and the systems involved in a vertical growing, you just have to pay attention to your plants. I mean, that's the best recommendation that I can give to you is just pay attention to what they do. We run so many different rooms at the same time that we kind of always have the same varieties going through at different stages. So if we notice something as it's happening in one room and say that it's 2 weeks farther ahead than another room, we might make an adjustment to the room that's a little bit younger. But it's basically just getting to know all your genetics and your strains and kind of playing around with it until you find the things that work well for you. And to even go a little bit further with that, just like Nelson was saying, if you really want to pick genetics that work well for you. So you have more control with LEDs, but you only have so much control either way. And you kind of have to pick things that are all going to work well together. And for the most part, if there's a strain that's not going to work well with our current SOPs, then we just can't really afford to keep that around because we'll never be able to efficiently grow it to the most of its potential.
Great. Yeah, in line with that, we have another question. And of course, as you guys are both saying, it's probably strain dependent, but just if there's any general strategy for like final week or end of run PPFD, and what you guys do with that.
I can chime in here. I typically dim the lights for the final week. I'm dimming the lights, and then that allows me to reduce the temperature a little bit. There have been, and when I mean dim the light, it's like a 40% reduction in energy. So if I'm at 100%, I'm going to go down to 60. I also am also looking at the entire canopy. So if I didn't prune well enough and there's a lot of smalls or mids in the bottom, I'm going to keep that light intensity a little bit higher and sacrifice a little bit of the quality of the tops. But what ends up happening when you're constantly, for me, in my experience, when you're constantly pushing that higher light late flower, you're going to get more pistil development. You're going to have the plant continue to push past that point, which can affect the overall bag appeal of the finished flower. So it's, in my opinion, it's better to try and simulate a reduction in light overall, like what you would see in nature. I seem to get a better result with that. But the plant at that point is pretty done. At this point, it's just the final notes.
Yeah, I agree. Just anything that you can do to kind of decrease that temperature and humidity in that last week of flower, especially. And then if you have cultivars that like to foxtail specifically as well, decreasing the light will kind of stop that foxtailing to some extent.
Yep. Can we do that living soil one, Pat?
Sure.
All right. Where's that question? I saw that. I like that question.
It is. What do you think about growing in living soil, no-till method under LED lights?
Okay, so a good friend of mine, Chris, this is who I was talking about. His LED grow is in living soil. His brand is Flora and Flame. I'm gonna give him a little plug because he's growing spectacular flower. But one of the challenges is that when you're pushing that higher light intensity, you're going to need a more readily available nutrition to keep up with that higher light intensity. His strategy has been to reduce the light intensity to meet the fertility of the beds and the uptake of that fertility by the plants. So if you're growing no-till, you're probably going to be running a slightly higher light intensity. Some of the more successful no-till guys that I've seen, they're really peaking out at 800 ppft. I've seen some guys run higher light intensity with the no-till beds, but there are some challenges in that because you're hitting the gas pedal down, and you're also working with an organic process that you can't push like you could in rock wool or something that has a lower CEC like cocoa. Hope that answers that question. Cody, do you have anything on that?
No, honestly, I don't have enough experience doing a no-till like live soil runs to really add anything to it, to be entirely honest.
All good.
I'm pretty much.
I've done a few.
Yeah, I'm pretty much entirely just like production style growing cocoa / we use peat moss currently. So peat moss perlite mixture.
The other challenge with the living soil beds is that you have, a large surface area of a moist media, has some water content. So with LEDs, one of the valid detractor of LEDs is that you need more dehumidification. That dehumidification is typically around 40% of what your HVAC power load is going to end up being, is what I've, somewhere around there. So you need more dehumidification. And then if you have living soil beds in there that are basically giant water sponges, you might require more dehumidification or more airflow. Otherwise, you're going to run into some plant problems. And generally, I don't recommend people running living soil beds if they haven't had a lot of experience. I know I've met a lot of people that are like, got investment money, they're building the whole facility up and they're going to do the no-till living soil thing at scale, but they've never really done it past like a tent or something like that. I think that is a very risky venture, and it's not that I have it's not that I'm bashing living soil beds. It's that I want to see people be successful. I want to see their money get used the right way, and then I'm always going to try and mitigate that risk and have people move into something that I would consider a little bit more advanced. And living soil is much more advanced because you're dealing with a lot more variables just in itself and a lot more things that can go wrong. So I just want to put that note out there that really develop it. The guys that are doing it well, if you talk to them, they're going to talk about how much time and energy and how many failures that they had to get to the point where they're able to do it well. And you're going to have a lot of failures and a lot of struggles just doing it in a traditional way, whether it's in cocoa or rockwool blocks or peat moss. There's enough challenges there alone than factoring in, you know, basically little microcosm organic factories.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we've got someone asking what you were talking about, Nelson, a balance between yield and quality. And if you could just speak to a little more of what kind of defining what that word quality means.
Sure.
When there's oversupply in most places and maybe growing the most isn't necessary.
Yeah, so quality quality is ultimately going to be determined by the consumer, but I think we have enough knowledge now of what the consumers are looking for. They're looking for a flower that looks good, that has some bag appeal generally. There's some exceptions to that when it comes to people that are looking for more sativa dominant varieties. It's going to be the smell, the aromatics, the taste, how it burns, and how well it burns long term as well, from the beginning of a joint down to the bottom. So this is usually the metrics on how people are smoking, you know, whether they consider something quality. On the higher end consumer market, THC doesn't even play a part. Like when I see people that are trying out flower, they're not asking what the THC value is. The customers at dispensaries are measuring quality by that THC number, because that THC number is kind of what's been pitched and sold as the value component that determines whether or not something is in a medical or recreational market. And that's just completely wrong. Like, THC is one part of the entire component. And the fact that that's used as a singular quality metric is robbing the consumer market and us cultivators from the opportunity of growing a number of things that have a multitude of beneficial effects, whether they're medical or psychoactive, that have been cut out of the gene pool because people's focus has been on one chemical when we're dealing with a plant that has thousands of chemicals. So when we talk about quality, I would love it if we moved away from THC even being a part of the conversation, because it's gotten so much energy over the last 10 years. And we started talking about all these other things that make up quality, whether they're phytonutrients, plant esters, all these different other flavonoids and terpenoids and other cannabinoids. There's over 500 cannabinoids that we know of. So really, quality is going to be that grower's ability to provide the best expression of that plant in a way that they would smoke it, right? So I think when I am determining quality of whether or not I want to bring something to the market that I'm proud of, I would want to have that feeling that I get. We're really not selling a flower, we're selling an experience. So we could look at like how we measure quality the same way people measure quality when it comes to cigars or wine. When they look at wine, they're not looking at the fucking alcohol. Oh, sorry. They're not looking at the alcohol content to determine whether or not it's quality. So that would be the way. Now, I know that quality is also subjective, but overall, if something's like a banger and it's grown well, everyone that smokes it's going to be like, this is special, right? So there's a general consensus. And then, and that has to come from the consumer. I mean, I want to enjoy what I grow, but I'm biased because I grew it. I'm married to it to some extent. So I have people around me that I respect that, they know what's good as far as what's relative to the consumer market. And when I bring them my products, they're going to tell me whether or not it's trash or whether it's good, or whether it was a good run or not. And also, quality is batch by batch. Not every batch is going to be the tip-top quality, the same way it is with wine or any other kind of alcohol or any other kind of product. So when I look at quality, I kind of look at it a different way. And quality is not the same as value in this current market. People value THC over quality in the consumer store market. That's a problem. This is also why the black market is still thriving, because there's no THC number on black market. All right, they open up the bag, they smell the bag, they look at it. Does it look shiny and purple? Does it have some kind of a smell that they're looking for? And then they smoke it. And if it smokes and it checks all those boxes, then you've got yourself a hit. And then people are talking about it. And that's really how I look at quality. So when we go back to this yield conversation and we're really pushing for yield, We know scientifically that when we're pushing for a higher amount of one factor of a plant's productivity, we are going to be taking away from other factors. And there is a balance point where you can meet the optimal yield based off of the quality that you want to create. And your quality might be a value brand. So you might want to try and get a good enough quality at the best price, which means the way that you're going to make that numbers work out is by pushing a little bit higher yield. It really depends on what your ethos is for your brand, what your mission statement is, what part of the market you're going after. And yes, everything is oversaturated right now, but we still have brands that are creating a specific quality that then the customers become accustomed to. And you see online, if they deviate from that quality, people complain. So I think the customers know what the quality is based off of the value that they're paying for. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
I have basically the exact same outlook on quality as Nelson does, but at the same time, I think Ohio is a less developed market because we're still medicinal. And I mean, we're only, I think it's 5 years now into it being medicinally legal. So the sale, like on our sales end, it still dictates that our highest THC content is what sells the best, which then controls how we have to define quality whenever we go to look at what strains we're going to push to market. It drives me insane that that's the current state of how our industry is in Ohio. But at that point, it kind of is what it is, and I have to grow things that are going to sell. So we have to make sure that we're picking things out that have high enough THC content that consumers aren't going to be like, oh, well, this is 23-24%. I don't touch anything underneath 30. Like it's just
yeah, there's nothing that you can do about that because that's just, I mean, really the only thing that we can do as cultivators and people that know a bit about the plant is to start working retail and working directly with the consumers to educate them. And then working with the bud tenders, there needs to be a connection between the bud tenders and the cultivators where we can kind of shift that narrative a little bit. Because look at like Skittles is still kind of king, and Skittles variants still kind of king. That's a 20% THC variety at best, maybe a little bit higher here and there. But for most customers, and that's an ugly flower, but the terp profile and the taste is what does it. So it only checks 2 boxes out of what people look at as value. But that's still somebody, I know people that are getting top dollar if they can grow Skittles really well. It's been around for a long time. But I do see it changing when you look on Reddit. I don't know if you troll Reddit, because Reddit's like good for the smaller markets.
Yeah, it's definitely a smaller portion of the market, but it definitely provides good information for like if it's actually quality or not.
And the easy way to give those higher THC customers what they want is what I'm seeing now, which is people are taking, mid-level flower and then dusting it with THCA isolate to bring that number up to like 45-50%. And then those customers come in and say, give me the strongest thing you got. And then they get weed that looks like a powdered donut.
Yeah, they get moon rocks, basically. Yeah,
but it goes so far in that other direction that it no longer becomes flower. And then at that point, maybe we can start creating a flower market that's going to value some level of diversity when it comes to chemistry. I think most growers are a little tired of it, but I think that's a problem with the rec market, and that's a big divide between the rec and the medical market and the traditional legacy market, because the legacy market doesn't care about that at all. And they're the number one competitor for the licensed market, and they're kind of winning. And there could be an approach to that where it's a little bit thought out to where we can get out of this THC value thing. It's like almost the rec and medical markets just become THC farming. So there's the other LED plug. You're going to get higher THC with the LEDs. So if you are cannabinoid farming for THC, you're going to get a higher level of THC production, but you also will get a higher level of terpenes and other phytochemicals and other phytonutrients that are really important as well.
Which I would also say too, it's still a viable way to go about it in a more mature market if you're able to produce concentrates. If you're going for just
Yes.
yield and like high THC content and you're going to take it and extract it, you're going to get higher yields on your concentrate side out of that. And with concentrates, you can basically turn it into whatever you want and whatever quality that you need for the most part. So
yeah, if you're farming for concentrates, so if you're cannabinoid farming and you're not using LEDs, you're leaving 30% on the table, like 100%. So most guys that are growing for extracts, they are going to be crop steering for that higher biomass and the higher THC, and that's where that purposeful use of those practices really makes sense, because you're just extracting those chemicals and reformulating it into products that people want, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's different than the singular flower type growers are trying to grow something that's unique and expressive for a specific
special.
brand. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had some awesome phenotypes that we've just had to throw out because we had a different phenotype that was, slightly better on the production side of things and also just would sell better.
Yeah, I deal with yeah, I just did a pheno hunt. These are all individual bags of, we went from 6,000 seeds down to 70, and these new cuts we're bringing to the market with Highline. And what I'm smelling things that are just radical, and they're doing depth tests and outdoor tests and all of it. And they're like, yeah, but it yielded half. So we're going to go with the one that, and I'm like, no, let me keep that one. We're not going to get rid of that. Let's just try it again, but as a lover of flower and those unique things, those are really important, but the market will steer it'll steer a lot of value out. It'll steer a lot of cultivars out that could have a huge impact. Like RS11 is one of those strains that kind of got blown out a little quickly, but if you've ever had the real RS11 cut, there is an aromatic profile in that plant that I have never smelled. It doesn't smell like cannabis. It smells like something like from a different planet mixed with paint thinner. I don't even really know how to describe it. So, but those things will, if they're not viable for commercial production, we'll lose that. Whereas we don't. We want to keep that around and then try and breed that into things that are going to be better at higher light intensities with these higher LED environments that are going to capture those qualities that people want. Like that's what the next project right now is, like ChemDog SFD. How can we get this plant to respond well to 1,500, 1,400, 1,500 ppfd, which is what we're getting out of these BIOS lights. We're able to push that. So can we now breed? Now it becomes a breeding challenge, not a growing challenge. Can we develop the cultivars and through selective breeding to be able to match the cultivation technology? And so that's a whole world that I play in now. That's really exciting and really fun. Doesn't change the fact that it's still a zero-sum game, and some things perform a little bit better with less light. And that's the dance, and that's what keeps our job interesting.
Yeah, I think breeding is also a really good way that you can eventually stand out from the competition, because you're just always going to have something that's significantly different from whatever the next guy has.
Yeah, it's key. Otherwise, you're just growing lemon cherry gelato.
Coming from the traditional horticulture market I was in, the breeders for those flowers, they've got to do both. It's got to be a consumer friendly look, and it's also got to work for the large scale producers. Otherwise it doesn't happen. It doesn't move forward. So yeah, there are many decades in front of the cannabis breeding, which is just now getting into the legal space to really get that work done.
Yeah, there's a few questions here that are good. Can I read one?
I was going to say, sorry, we could go on with that topic forever.
I know we could. This is an interesting one. Do you find any necessity for physically raising and lowering the lights on top to adjust PPFD? If you're in a mobile rack system, you're not going to be able to do that. You're working in a fixed position. So you're going to be dimming the lights, and then you're going to be training the plants down. But if you're on a single level, yes, I think there is a benefit on being able to raise and lower the lights. One of the benefits is efficiency. So you could have those lights lower down earlier on and then dimmed to where you're going to be using half of the power that you would be using if they were fixed up above. I see guys that are putting their plants in, and they've got their plants, 8 feet away from their LEDs, and they're running their LEDs at 100% at week 1. That's inefficient, right? So there is an advantage being able to drop that down to a foot below the light, and then being able to raise it up for that final week. So one of the things that we're talking about is reducing that light intensity for the final week or two. One of the things you can do is you can then raise those lights up to that reduction, and then you're going to expand your light footprint. So you're going to get more light coverage to those tops that are hanging off the tray, and they'll finish a little bit better. So there is an advantage to that. And there's a few companies that have created some light movers. If you can afford to invest in it, it is an investment. It's another moving part. You also, it's kind of a pain in the butt to be constantly raising and lower the lights, but that is what I do in my grow rooms. If I'm running single level, I'm constantly raising and lower the lights and dimming them and kind of tuning the room. Every week I go in there, and that's also how I get to see what's going on with the canopy. There's a benefit to that, but at scale, it's not that feasible. So at scale, you probably want light movers if you were going to try and deploy that. But that's an important question. I wanted to answer that.
Yeah, for sure. It would definitely be really labor intensive at scale to be moving the lights
with
constantly.
100 light room. No.
Yeah, it'd be.
I'm talking about like these 12 light rooms where I get to play.
Yeah.
So with something like that, if you have a small grow, I would raise and lower the lights as needed.
Yep. All right, so we've got another one that says, what was your worst limiting factor regarding implementation of LEDs? So I guess Cody, making that switch, what was the biggest challenge that you had to change your previous style or SOPs?
It's HVAC and dehumidification all day, every day. That's always the hardest thing to actually get right. And you have to change so much about your grow room whenever you go to like a multi-tiered, and you're putting so many more plants in the room, which then leads to you putting more water into the room. And you have to massively upscale the amount of air conditioning and dehumidification that you have. Like, for example, I think that we had 25 tons previously, and then we added 60 tons to it, to a room, just basically doubling the square footage footprint and the amount of plants. We had to add so much more, especially with the LEDs, because they weren't producing as much heat like in the same footprint. So we had to actually add in air conditioners that were capable of heating, so that we could get our air conditioners to run more so that they dehumidify more. It's totally unintuitive if you aren't familiar with like how HVAC works, but that's 100% of the time. Don't ever skimp on your HVAC design or your dehumidification design. That's going to be your biggest issue. It causes so many problems constantly. And if I could recommend one thing to anybody looking to invest in any of that, it's go with redundancy. I mean, don't just be absolutely, for lack of a better word, screwed if you have an air conditioner that goes down.
And then to note on that, if you guys are selecting like a split system, there are companies like Daikin where they make a variable speed multi-stage with hot gas reheat. I would say if you can go with hot gas reheat, that's going to be way more cost effective than electric gas reheat. Mm-hmm. But you want variable speed, so you want to be able to have those 3 speeds to deal with the transition when the HVAC moves from cooling to dehumidification to heating, and you want that to be gentle. Otherwise, you're going to see some spikes. So there are companies that make variable speed, I believe, with the condenser and the fan. I'm not an HVAC specialist, but this is what there's a Daikin unit that I usually spec out if I'm working with like the redundancy of 5 tons. And then if I'm 5 to 10 tons, and then if you can afford it, chiller plants are probably the best. But a chiller plant and a boiler, very complicated. It's going to give you the most control, but when they break, it can be hard to get the parts. So, that's if I've designed and built facilities that had chiller and boiler plants, and they work great. But if something goes wrong, you could be 3 months from getting that part. So working with a HVAC company that has as much of those features as possible, and you can get the part in less than a week, is critical. So these are things that we don't think about when we're building like this dream grow. It's like, well, wait a minute, if it breaks, what's the support look like? Mm-hmm. So those are things we have to factor in. So off the shelf, but like hot gas reheat, variable speed, clutch with LED grows.
Yeah. Okay, and then on top of that, sorry, just to add one more thing to that, is that if you can afford to keep any of those vital parts to your equipment on hand in any amount, like keep a spare one on hand, so that if you have to deal with what he's talking about, where there's a 3-month downtime just because you're waiting on a part, like just keep one on hand if you can afford it.
Okay, there's one little thing I wasn't touched on yet. Sorry, we're running out of time, but someone's asking about CO2 concentration in proportion to light intensity and the different stages. So if you have just a quick minute to touch on that. And
Yeah, these are fantastic questions. So yeah, we can go over for about 5 minutes. So take your time. Thanks, guys.
Cody, we're probably in alignment with this. What are you running in veg, like veg and early flower, 800 to 1,000 ppfd?
Yeah.
And then once once you get that light intensity above 70%, you're at 1,500.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly what we're doing. I think we actually only go up to about 1,400, but we have our sensor in the room at like a little bit higher of a height. So I think that lower down in the canopy, we get a lot higher of a CO2 content, and then a little bit higher, we get slightly lower. So
and I've played with this based off of measuring how much CO2 I go through in a sealed room, and based off of the consumption. So even if I'm at 1,500 ppfd, it just seems to be a waste because the plants aren't really using it earlier on. Whereas like 800 to 1,000 ppfd seems to be that point where I'm hearing the regulator click on a lot more, where there's more use. And then I don't know if there's really a need for anything higher than 1,500 ppfd unless you're trying to grow a Jurassic Park pterodactyl or something. I don't know. I've never noticed a benefit in yield or quality above 1,500. That's been my anecdote.
Yeah, and you will notice a difference in yield and quality if you go too low on it. So
you will.
As much as the sustainability aspect is for me, where I don't want to be putting extra CO2 into it, if I have to push it a little bit higher, you're not going to hurt the plants by any means to go a little bit higher on your CO2 content. It's wasteful, that's for sure. It's wasteful, and it's not great for the environment, and it costs money. But I would rather do that and get the maximum potential than go low on it and miss out on something.
I agree. And I would say, like, even at 1,200, I've noticed a decrease in yield compared to 1,200 ppm to 1,500 ppm. But sometimes that's what your budget can allow, or wherever you're at. I would just say be at least above 1,000 if you're running above 900 ppfd. Anything else, Pat? I think we got more questions. We got 2 more minutes.
Yeah, let's see.
Final question. Find the best one.
I've got one that I find interesting. It's just, do you find the ability to shift spectrums beneficial in a commercial setup? As much as I would love to play around with spectrum and stuff like that, we just already have so many variables that we have to take into consideration. So if I was doing it on a small scale and I could run a like R&D room or something like that, I would probably want to try shifting spectrums. But whenever I'm trying to decrease the amount of variables across our grow generally, I don't think that it would be that beneficial to us to shift spectrums. And it's just another thing to play around with, like, that's going to become labor intensive, where like similar to the raising and lowering of the lights at scale.
So I've done a lot of work with that, and at scale, that is the problem. Is unless you can fully program it and trust the system, and those systems aren't out yet. So what I've done is spend a lot of time to figure out what spectrums are going to improve the morphology and the quality of the flower, and then working with BIOS on that now, on creating some fixed spectrum lights that will do well with specific types of plants. Or maybe you'll see some different results from that. Because I can tell you, even though the yield, there's not a lot of difference in yield with the spectrums, which is interesting. Maybe a 5% differential, so it's very negligible. But there is a difference in the way that the flower looks and the overall quality. And there is some benefits and detriments to having 730 in the light and then using the 730 strategically. You can, it just adds another layer of complexity, which we don't necessarily need in a commercial setting, which most of the time people at scale would screw it up unless it was completely programmable and set and forget it. But I don't think we're there yet in the industry to really deploy that technology successfully at scale. Small scale, I recommend everyone plays with it because there's some fun stuff with it. Cool.
Maybe a last one here then would be, what do you think about a sunrise sunset setting? My thoughts on that is it's kind of to what Cody said about HVAC, and it's not so much about mimicking a sunrise or sunset in spectrum, but If you turn on all the lights at 100% power all at once, that's harder for your HVAC to keep up. So a slow ramp helps you keep that stuff in line.
I agree with that. And the only thing that would be beneficial lighting wise would be the sunrise sunset with the phytochrome response. So that's 7:30. But you can really screw that up, which I have done. I have given the plants too much 7:30, and we had really interesting results that were not desirable, but they're interesting. So just some notes on that. Yeah, for the equipment and environment, it's worth it.
All right. I
Well-
think we might be at the end.
Yeah, this has been just a fantastic conversation with excellent questions. I want to thank Patrick, Nelson, and Cody again for being with us today and for sharing these insights. And also thank you to BIOS Lighting for making today's webinar possible. If you have any questions, it looks like the contact information for Nelson and Cody is up now. And I think on the next slide, Patrick has his information as well. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you also for everyone who joined today. We had amazing questions. We weren't able to get to all of them. So for those that we couldn't get to, we'll be answering the questions via email after the webinar. As I noted before, a recording of this conversation will also be sent to you to your email soon. So please be sure to watch out for that. And thank you so much, everyone, again, and enjoy the rest of your day.